The cold was a constant companion, a thief that stole the feeling from her fingers and the warmth from her hearth. Rune knew its many voices, the sharp howl that sliced through the pines, the low moan that promised a blizzard, and the dead silence that meant the temperature had dropped so far the very air was brittle. She had been born into this cold, cast out into the northern reach with her grandmother when she was just a child, branded a pariah for the old magic that ran in their veins, the kind the packs had outlawed. Her grandmother was gone now, dust and memories beneath a cairn of frozen stones, but the cold remained. It was in the marrow of her bones, a permanent ache she carried with her. She lived in the cabin they had built with their own hands, a small, stubborn refusal to be erased, tucked into a valley the wolf patrols rarely bothered to sweep. Here, she was a ghost, a whisper of old tales, and that was how she survived. Each day was a litany of small wars against the encroaching frost, chopping wood until her shoulders screamed, checking her traps with hands so numb they felt like clumsy wood, grinding herbs that smelled of summer and memory. She was alone, but she was not lonely. Loneliness was a luxury for people who expected company. Rune expected only the cold, and it had never disappointed her. The morning it all changed began with a silence that was wrong. It wasn't the brittle silence of deep cold. It was a heavy, listening silence, as if the entire forest held its breath. Rune felt it the moment she opened her eyes, a pressure against her senses. She pulled on her layers of patched wool and leather, her breath pluming in the single room of her cabin. Her gaze fell on the empty space by the door where her boots should have been. A small sigh escaped her. Not again, cub. A tiny ball of black fur wriggled out from under her cot, a ridiculously oversized leather boot held firmly in its needle-sharp teeth. The wolf pup, all paws and ears, gave a triumphant little yip, dragging its prize toward the hearth. He was a scrap of a thing she'd found half-frozen 2 weeks ago, his mother likely lost to a patrol or a harsher winter predator. He'd been near death, but he had the stubborn heart of the North in him, and he had a peculiar obsession: her boots. Every morning one of them would be missing, dragged to a new hiding place. It had become a ritual, her first small battle of the day. She couldn't leave the cabin without them. The snow was too deep, the ground too unforgiving. The pup seemed to understand this on some primal level. Hiding her boots was how he kept her home. She gently wrestled the boot from him, ignoring his playful growls. "You are a menace," she whispered, ruffling the fur on his head. He licked her hand, his sandpaper tongue a rough comfort. She found the other boot tucked behind the woodpile. As she laced them up, that heavy silence pressed in again. It was coming from the west, from the direction of the pass. Curiosity was a danger she couldn't afford, but the wrongness of the silence pulled at her. Armed with the small axe she used for kindling and a deep-seated caution, she stepped outside. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The air was thick with the smell of pine, frost, and something else. Something metallic and sharp. Blood. She followed the scent, moving through the trees like the wraith the packs believed her to be. The pup whined at the door but knew better than to follow unless called. Her grandmother had taught her how to walk without sound, how to read the language of broken twigs and disturbed snow. The trail was obvious, a swath of chaos and churned earth. A fight. A bad one. And then she saw him. He was a wolf, but a wolf of impossible size. His fur the color of storm clouds and silver. He was crumpled at the base of an ancient oak, a black-fletched arrow buried deep in his shoulder, the snow around him a horrifying canvas of red. His breathing was a ragged, shallow thing, each exhale a cloud of steam that barely seemed to form before the cold stole it. Her first instinct, the instinct of survival honed over a decade of exile, was to turn and run. This was pack business. This was the world that had cast her out, left her to die. A wolf this large, this powerful even in near death, was a lord. An alpha. Someone whose very existence was a threat to hers. She took a step back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Let him die. It was the law of the wild. The strong survived. The weak perished. He was weak now. His people had left her to the same fate. But then the wolf's head lifted just an inch. His eyes, the color of molten gold, found hers. There was no plea in them, no fear. Just a raw, staggering fury that he was being laid this low, a pride that refused to be extinguished. It was a look she recognized. She saw it in the mirror every morning. A curse slipped from her lips, swallowed by the silent trees. She couldn't leave him. The part of her that was a healer, the part of her that had nursed a half-dead pup back to life, the stubborn part that refused to be as cruel as the world that had made her, wouldn't allow it. "You are going to be the death of me," she muttered to the dying animal, and the forest, and herself. Getting him back to the cabin was a nightmare. He was impossibly heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. She couldn't lift him. Instead, she used her knowledge of herbs to pack the wound with a clotting moss and a numbing root, whispering soothing words that felt like lies on her tongue. She built a crude travois from fallen branches and strips of her own cloak, a desperate piece of engineering that groaned and threatened to collapse with every step. She hauled him through the snow, her muscles burning, her lungs on fire. The sun was a pale, useless disk in the sky, offering no warmth. The world was shades of white and gray, and the stark, shocking red of the blood that dripped from his wound onto the snow behind them. By the time she dragged him over the threshold of her cabin, night had fallen and she was trembling with exhaustion. The pup, who had been a frantic ball of whines behind the door, fell silent, his hackles raised at the sight and scent of the massive wolf. "He's a guest," Rune said, her voice hoarse. "Behave." The pup seemed to understand, sinking to his belly and watching with wide, nervous eyes. She worked by the light of a tallow candle, the flickering flame casting long shadows that made the small cabin feel cavernous. The arrow had to come out. It was barbed, a hunter's arrow meant to tear and shred. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, calm and steady, guiding her hands. "Cut with the grain of the muscle. Be swift. Hesitation is a second wound." She heated her sharpest knife in the fire, took a deep breath, and cut. The wolf let out a guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards, a sound of pure agony. His golden eyes snapped open, locking onto her. For a terrifying second, she thought he would lunge, injured or not. But he just watched her, his gaze intense and unwavering as she worked the arrowhead free. As her fingers brushed against his skin near the wound, a strange sensation prickled through her. It was like touching ice and fire at once, a deep, unnatural cold that seemed to radiate from his very bones, warring with the feverish heat of the infection. And beneath it, something else. A thrumming, dark energy that felt like a parasite. It wasn't just a wound. He was poisoned. Or cursed. This was old magic. Dark magic. The kind of thing that had gotten her family exiled in the first place. She pulled the arrow free with a sickening sound and threw it into the fire. The wolf shuddered, a low whine escaping his throat, and then his eyes rolled back. He was unconscious. For 3 days he drifted in and out of a fevered state. Rune worked tirelessly, forcing bitter teas between his teeth, cleaning the wound that refused to heal properly, and covering him with every blanket and pelt she owned. The unnatural cold clung to him, chilling the very air in the cabin. She had to keep the fire roaring, using up her precious wood supply at an alarming rate. On the 4th morning, she woke to find him gone. The pile of furs where the massive wolf had lain was empty. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. Had he woken and left? Or worse, had he died and she'd somehow lost the body? Then she heard a groan from her own cot. A man was lying there. He was naked, tangled in her one good blanket, his body a roadmap of scars old and new. Broad-shouldered and lean, he had the same storm-cloud dark hair as the wolf, and even in sleep, his face was harsh and commanding. The wound in his shoulder was still there, angry and red against his pale skin. He was a shifter. Of course he was. Only a shifter could be that large, that powerful. Her heart sank. She hadn't saved a simple wolf. She had saved one of them, one of the lords of the land that despised her. The pup, who had been sleeping at her feet, trotted over to the cot and licked the man's hand. The man stirred, his eyes opening. They were the same eyes. Molten gold, intelligent, and filled with a pain that he was clearly trying to master. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over the small, sparse cabin, over her patched clothes and worn face. There was no gratitude in his expression, only a cold, calculating assessment. "Where am I?" His voice was a low rasp, deep and rough with disuse, but it held an undeniable note of command. It was not a voice that was used to asking questions. It was a voice that was used to being obeyed. "My cabin," Rune said, her own voice tight. She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. She suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed. The massive wolf had been a patient. This man was a threat. "You were injured. I found you." He tried to sit up, a sharp hiss of pain stopping him. He looked down at the wound in his shoulder as if seeing it for the first time. "You did this?" He gestured at the clean dressing. "I took the arrow out," she said defensively, "and I've been trying to keep the fever from killing you." His golden eyes narrowed. He looked at her again, a longer, more searching look this time. "You are not Pack," he stated. It wasn't a question. "You are human." "I am what I am," she replied, her chin lifting. A woman who found a dying wolf in the snow. A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed his face. He was clearly not accustomed to such clipped, unimpressed answers. He was a man used to deference, to fear. She gave him neither. She had spent her life fearing the Pack, the Alphas, the entire world he represented. Up close, stripped of his power and laid low by an arrow, he was just a man. A wounded, dangerous man, but a man nonetheless. "The arrow," he gritted out, his hand going to his shoulder. "What did you do with it?" "I burned it." "The poison remains," he said, more to himself than to her. He fell back against the cot, his face pale with a sheen of sweat. "It's slow." Rune knew. She had felt it. The dark, cold magic clinging to him. "It's a curse," she said quietly. "Not a poison. It's meant to decay you from the inside out, to make you rot while you still breathe." His gaze snapped back to her, sharp and piercing. How would a human know of such things? The old anger, the familiar bitterness rose in her throat. "The world is bigger than your packs and their laws, Wolf." She turned away, busying herself with the kettle over the fire. "Some of us remember what you've tried so hard to make everyone forget." For a long moment there was only the crackle of the fire and the whistle of the wind outside. She could feel his eyes on her back, heavy and intense. She refused to turn, refused to show him the fear that was churning in her gut. She had brought an alpha into her home, the highest of the high, a king, for all she knew. And she was speaking to him as if he were a stray dog. "What is your name?" he finally asked. The command was still there, but it was tempered by something else, a grudging curiosity. She hesitated. "A name was a power you gave to someone." "Rune." He was silent for another long moment. "I am Idris," he said. He didn't give a title. He didn't need to. The name, the power that coiled around him even when he was wounded, it was enough. She didn't recognize the name, but she recognized the arrogance, the certainty. He was someone important, someone who could have her killed with a word. And she was the only thing keeping him alive. It was a strange, terrifying balance of power. The days that followed were a tense truce. Idris was a terrible patient. He fought her at every turn, refusing to rest, trying to push himself to his feet long before he had the strength. He hated being weak, hated being dependent on her, and he made no secret of his disdain for her and her hedge-witch remedies. "This is filth," he growled one afternoon as she tried to get him to drink a bitter tea. "I need a pack healer, not a woman who talks to roots." "The pack healers would let you die," Rune shot back, her patience worn thin. "This filth is the only thing fighting the cold in your blood. Drink it." He stared at her, his golden eyes blazing. For a moment she thought he would refuse, would knock the cup from her hand. But then, with a low curse, he drank it down, his expression sour. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. They were adversaries, trapped in the confines of her tiny cabin by the blizzard that had descended upon them. He saw her as a superstitious human, a nobody. She saw him as the embodiment of the cruel, arrogant power that had destroyed her family. He represented the pack laws that called her grandmother's knowledge a crime. He was everything she had learned to hate. And yet, she tended to him. She changed his bandages, washed the sweat from his brow, and forced food and medicine into him. And he, grudgingly, let her. The pup, whom she had started calling Cub, became the unlikely diplomat between them. He adored Idris. He would curl up on the cot beside the wounded man, a tiny ball of black fur against a giant, and Idris, who seemed to have no softness in him for anything else, would rest a hand on the pup's back. It was during one of these moments that Rune saw the first crack in his armor. Idris was asleep, his face relaxed for once, looking younger and less severe. Cub was nestled against his chest, and Idris's hand was resting protectively over him. It was a gesture of unconscious tenderness, a stark contrast to the harsh, demanding man who was awake. It made her breath catch. She was still just a healer to him, a convenience. She knew that. But her own traitorous heart was beginning to see something else. She saw the way his eyes tracked her movements around the cabin, the way he would fall silent when she hummed the old songs her grandmother had taught her. She saw the deep, abiding loneliness in him, a cold that matched the curse in his veins. It was a cold she recognized. Every morning she would wake with the intention of leaving. He was getting stronger. The wound, though still infected with the curse, was slowly closing. Soon he would be able to fend for himself. Soon she could disappear back into the wilderness, back to her quiet, solitary life. She had done her duty. She had saved a life, even if it was one she despised. But every morning, Cub would have hidden one of her boots. She would search the small cabin, a strange ritual of frustration and reluctant affection. And Idris would watch her, a faint, almost imperceptible amusement in his golden eyes. "That beast is loyal to you," he said one morning as she retrieved her boot from inside a sack of dried herbs. "He's loyal to whoever feeds him," she retorted, not looking at him. "No," Idris said, his voice quiet but certain. "He knows you are his. He doesn't want you to leave." The words hung in the air between them. He doesn't want you to leave. The unspoken question was there too. "Do you?" She didn't answer. She pulled on her boots, her hands trembling slightly. She needed to get out, to feel the sharp, clean cold on her face and remember who she was. She was Rune, the outcast, the hermit. She was not a nursemaid to a wolf lord. "I'm checking the traps," she said, her voice clipped. "I'll be back." She didn't wait for a reply, slipping out the door and into the blinding white of the snow-covered world. But for the first time, the cold didn't feel like a companion. It felt like an enemy she was returning to, after a brief, dangerous taste of warmth. The warmth of a fire, a pup, and the presence of a man she should have hated, but was finding it increasingly difficult too. The tension in the cabin grew thicker with each passing day. The blizzard showed no signs of breaking, trapping them in an unwilling intimacy. They learned the rhythms of each other's existence. Rune learned that Idris slept lightly, waking at the smallest sound, a soldier's habit. He learned that she talked in her sleep, murmuring the names of herbs and snatches of old songs. They rarely spoke of anything that mattered. They talked of the weather, of the dwindling woodpile, of Cub's latest mischief. But beneath the surface of these mundane conversations, a silent war was being waged. He was trying to assert his authority, and she was refusing to bend. "When the storm breaks, my wolves will find me," he stated one evening, as if it were a foregone conclusion. He was sitting up, propped against the wall, his strength slowly returning. "Good for you," Rune said, stirring a pot of thin rabbit stew over the fire. His jaw tightened at her dismissive tone. "They will not be pleased to find me in the care of an outcast." The word was a test, a deliberate prod. Rune's hand stilled. She turned to face him, her eyes dark. "Then you should have had the decency to die where I found you. It would have saved us both a lot of trouble." The air crackled. His golden eyes narrowed into slits. The sheer force of his will, the alpha power he held in check, washed over her. It was a palpable thing, a pressure designed to make lesser creatures cower and submit. She had felt its edges before, but this was the first time he had directed it at her fully. It was like standing in the path of an avalanche, but she did not cower. She had been pressed down her entire life, by the pack, by the cold, by grief. She knew how to stand her ground. She met his gaze and held it, her heart hammering but her spine straight. Slowly, impossibly, the pressure receded. A look of grudging respect dawned in his eyes. It was a look that infuriated her more than his anger, because it made her feel seen. "You have a spine of iron, witch," he murmured, the word witch sounding less like an insult and more like a statement of fact. "It's all I have," she replied, turning back to the stew. Her hands were shaking. A few days later, he was on his feet, pacing the small cabin like a caged lion. His movements were still stiff, his face pale with the effort, but he was no longer bedridden. The curse still clung to him, a faint aura of cold and decay that made her skin crawl, but her remedies were holding it at bay. Her presence, she was starting to realize, seemed to soothe it in a way the herbs alone could not. When she was near him, his breathing was easier, the chill emanating from him less severe. It was her nullification power, working passively, a fact she did not yet comprehend. He stopped his pacing to watch her grind herbs with a mortar and pestle. "My pack's healers use chants and glowing stones," he said, his tone laced with contempt. "They have not been able to touch the curse my father carried, or his father before him. And yet, your mud and weeds seem to hold it back." Rune paused. "A curse in your family?" He looked away, staring into the fire. "An old wound, from a war long past. It claims the men of my line before their time. It weakens the blood. A slow decay." He spoke the words as if they were poison in his mouth. "They say it was laid by a queen of the Fae, betrayed by my ancestor." "That's not what this is," Rune said softly. "The Fae curse you speak of is a thing of legend, a withering. What you carry is different. It is personal. It is filled with a singular, burning hatred. This was made for you, and only you." Idris turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "How do you know so much?" "I listen," she said simply. "Magic has a voice. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. This curse screams of betrayal, of love turned to poison." The silence that followed was profound. He didn't deny it. He simply stared at her, and in the depths of his golden eyes, she saw a flicker of an ancient, terrible pain. He was not just a king. He was a man carrying a wound far deeper than the one in his shoulder. That night, she was woken by a sound, a choked gasp of pain. She sat up, her heart pounding. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the cabin in deep shadow. Idris was on his feet, his back to her, clutching his shoulder. A tremor ran through his powerful frame. "Idris?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He was fighting for control, she could see it. The curse was surging. A faint, dark mist seemed to be coiling around him, and the temperature in the cabin plummeted. Cub whined from his spot near the hearth, pressing himself flat to the floor. Rune didn't think. She threw off her blankets and went to him. "Let me see." "Stay back," he growled, his voice strained. It was a command, a warning. She ignored it. She reached out and placed her hand on his bare back. The moment her skin touched his, two things happened at once. A shock, violent and electric, jolted up her arm. It was brutally cold, a soul-deep chill that felt like dying. But at the same time, she felt the dark energy of the curse recoil from her touch, like a slug doused in salt. It hissed and retreated. Idris gasped, not in pain this time, but in shock. The tremor racking his body subsided. The oppressive cold in the room lessened. He slowly turned to face her. His eyes were wide, his face a mask of disbelief. What are you?" he breathed. "I don't know," she whispered, her own voice trembling. She pulled her hand back as if burned. The tips of her fingers were numb, icy cold. I just fight the cold." He reached out, his own hand moving with a strange hesitation, and gently took her wrist. His skin was still cool, but the deathly chill was gone. He turned her hand over, examining her fingers. He looked from her hand to her face, and for the first time, she saw something other than pride or pain or anger in his eyes. It was awe. "All my life," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "this cold has been my shadow. Nothing has ever touched it. Nothing has ever pushed it back." He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if he were seeing a miracle. "Until you." The cabin was silent, save for the sound of their breathing. He was still holding her wrist. His thumb stroked softly against the pulse point on her skin. It was the first gentle touch she had felt from him, from anyone in years. It sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She pulled her hand away, her heart a wild bird in her chest. "I need to get more wood," she stammered, turning away from the intensity in his gaze. "Rune." His voice stopped her. She didn't turn around. "Thank you." The two words were quiet, wrenched from him, but they were genuine. They shattered the fragile peace she had built for herself. It was one thing to heal an enemy. It was another thing entirely to have him be grateful. It made him real. It made the connection between them, the strange energy that arced when they touched, undeniable. The next morning, for the first time, her boots were sitting right by the door. Cub trotted over and nudged her hand as if to say, "See? I can be good." But Rune found no relief in it. The pup no longer felt the need to keep her there. Because now, Idris did. And that was infinitely more dangerous. The storm broke. The world outside the cabin was suddenly bright. The sunlight on the fresh snow almost blinding. With the clear sky came a new kind of tension. Idris's people would be looking for him. Her time with him, this strange suspended reality in the small cabin, was ending. The thought should have brought relief. It brought a hollow ache instead. Idris seemed to feel it too. He was restless, constantly scanning the horizon from the single window. The adversary dynamic between them had shifted after that night. The animosity had been replaced by a wary, fragile curiosity. They started to talk. Really talk. He told her of his kingdom, of the political maneuverings of the rival pacts, of the weight of a crown he never asked for. He spoke of the curse as a constant drain, a shadow that sapped his strength and made true connection impossible. Anyone who got too close, who cared for him, seemed to suffer misfortune. The curse fed on warmth, on love. It isolated him. "My intended mate," he said one afternoon, his voice low and devoid of emotion, was a powerful she-wolf from the southern pack. An alliance. She was beautiful, ambitious. He paused. "She tried to heal me. She used her own life force to try and fight the curse. It nearly killed her. After that, she looked at me with horror. She broke the alliance and left." Rune listened, her heart aching for the man behind the king. She wasn't your mate, she said softly. A true mate bond is about balance. She tried to overpower the curse. She should have tried to understand it. And you understand it? He asked, a hint of the old skepticism in his voice. I understand that it is a living thing, born of pain, she said. You cannot kill pain with force. You can only soothe it. She looked at her own hands. Or nullify it. He didn't tell her the whole truth. He didn't tell her the curse had not been laid by a fey queen, but by that same intended mate, a sorceress named Lyra, who had seen his dedication to his kingdom as a rejection of her. Her parting gift had been a curse of slow decay, one that would make him untouchable, unlovable, ensuring he would die as he lived, alone. As he grew stronger, Rune grew more withdrawn. She felt him watching her constantly. The way he looked at her was different now. It was no longer the assessing gaze of an alpha. It was the look of a man. A man who was beginning to see the woman who had saved him. One evening, he caught her staring out at the snow-laden pines, a familiar, deep sadness in her eyes. What do you think about when you look out there? He asked, his voice gentle. My grandmother, Rune confessed, her voice thick. She loved the winter. She said it was honest. It doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is. Harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. Like you, he murmured, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. She turned to look at him. He was standing closer than she had realized. The small space of the cabin suddenly felt charged, the air thick with unspoken things. His golden eyes were soft, searching. I am not beautiful, she said, the words a knee-jerk reaction born of years of being told she was nothing. You are like the North, Rune, he said, his voice a low rumble. You are stark and strong and true. You have survived what should have broken you. That is a kind of beauty that the pampered ladies of my court could never understand. He raised a hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment before they gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was warm. Not the feverish heat of his injury, but a natural, living warmth. The curse was weakening. Or rather, her presence was holding it so far at bay that he was beginning to feel like himself again. Her breath hitched. Her entire world, once so certain in its lonely structure, was fracturing. He was not the monster she had imagined. He was a man, burdened and broken, and he was looking at her as if she were the sunrise after a long, dark winter. It was too much. She pulled back, her heart racing. Your wolves will be here soon, she said, her voice strained. You should be ready. It was a dismissal, a desperate attempt to rebuild the walls around her heart. The softness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a familiar mask of royal authority. Yes, he said, his voice cool once more. They will. The next day, a horn blast echoed through the valley, sharp and clear in the cold air. It was a signal. A search party. Idris stood, his posture immediately changing. He was no longer a patient, a man recovering in a hermit's cabin. He was a king. He looked at Rune, his expression unreadable. It is time. Rune simply nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She felt a profound sense of loss, so sharp and sudden it was like a physical blow. This was it. He would go back to his world of power and politics, and she would remain in hers, a ghost in the wilderness. The last few weeks would become nothing more than a strange fever dream. She busied herself with packing a small pouch for him, dried meat, the last of her healing salve, some herbs for pain. It was a foolish gesture, she knew. His wolves would have all the supplies he needed. But she needed to do something with her hands, something to keep from looking at him. When she turned to give it to him, he was standing right behind her. He took the pouch, his fingers brushing against hers. I owe you my life, Rune. You owe me nothing, she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. I would have done the same for any creature. It was a lie, and they both knew it. No, he said softly. You would not have. He placed a hand under her chin, gently forcing her to look at him. Look at me. She met his gaze, and the raw emotion she saw there stole her breath. It was gratitude, yes, but it was more. It was longing. It was a desperate, aching need. Come with me, he said, the words a quiet command, but his eyes were pleading. Leave this place. Come back to the capital. You will have anything you desire, a position as a royal healer, wealth, respect. The offer was a fantasy, a fairy tale, but she saw the truth behind it. He didn't want a royal healer. He wanted her. He needed her. His curse was not gone, merely dormant. Without her, the cold would return. She would be his living remedy. A beautiful, gilded cage. And what would she be there? The outcast witch? The king's pet human? The pack would despise her. The court would mock her. She would be just as alone in his castle as she was in this cabin, but without the freedom of the wilderness. I can't, she whispered, her heart breaking. This is my home. It's all I have. Pain flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by his kingly pride. I see, he said, his voice turning to ice. You would rather have your pride and your hovel than a life of comfort. The cruelty of his words was a slap. My hovel is where I am free, she shot back, her own anger rising to meet his. In your castle, I would be a possession, a curiosity. I will not trade my freedom for a cage, no matter how gilded. A second horn blast, closer this time, cut through the tension. His wolves were near. So be it, Idris said, his face a cold, hard mask. He turned and walked to the door without a backward glance. Cub whined, looking from Rune to Idris, confused and distressed. Idris paused at the threshold. If you ever change your mind, he said, his back still to her, the gates of Silverwood will be open to you. And then he was gone. Rune stood in the center of the cabin, the silence he left behind a deafening roar. The warmth he had brought into her small home seemed to seep out the door with him, leaving only the familiar, biting cold. She sank to her knees, and for the first time in years, she wept. Life returned to its old rhythm, but the song was gone. The silence of the cabin was no longer peaceful, it was empty. The cold felt colder, the days longer. Rune went about her chores, her movements mechanical, her mind 1,000 miles away in a castle she had never seen. Cub was her shadow, his grief mirroring her own. He would often sit by the door, his nose pointed west, letting out a soft, mournful whine. He stopped hiding her boots. There was no need. She had nowhere to go and no desire to leave. Her entire world had shrunk to the size of the hole Idris had left in it. She told herself she had made the right choice. Pride. Freedom. These were the things she had always valued. But the memory of his touch, the warmth in his golden eyes, the sound of his voice saying her name, they haunted her waking moments and her dreams. Weeks turned into a month. The snow began to melt, revealing the hard, brown earth beneath. Spring was coming to the reach, a time of renewal. For Rune, it just felt like the world was moving on without her. One evening, a shadow fell across her doorway. Rune's heart leaped into her throat, a wild, impossible hope flaring within her. Idris. But it was not him. The woman standing there was tall and elegant, her cloak the color of blood, her hair as black as a raven's wing. She was beautiful, but it was a cold, sharp beauty, like a shard of obsidian. Her eyes, a startling violet, held no warmth. So, the woman said, her voice like honey laced with poison, this is the little mud witch who thinks she can steal what is mine. Rune got to her feet, her hand instinctively reaching for the small axe by the hearth. Cub let out a low, vicious growl, planting himself in front of her. I don't know who you are, Rune said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. The woman smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. I am Lyra, and you have been keeping my pet alive. Her gaze swept the cabin with disdain. He always did have a taste for the pathetic. Lyra. The name hit Rune like a physical blow. The intended mate. The sorceress. The one who had laid the curse. The curse, Rune breathed. It wasn't the Fae. It was you. He chose his kingdom over me, Lyra said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. He chose duty over passion. So I gave him a gift. A kingdom of one. A throne of ice. He was meant to waste away. Alone and untouchable. But you interfered. Lyra took a step into the cabin. The air grew frigid, the shadows seeming to deepen and writhe. The dark, parasitic energy Rune had felt on Idris was pouring from this woman in waves. I can feel your strange little magic, Lyra hissed, her violet eyes glowing with a malevolent light. A nullifying field, an anomaly. You dampen my curse just by breathing near him. I sensed it the moment he returned to the castle. The decay had slowed. He was warmer. She said the word like it was an obscenity. So I came to remove the interference, permanently. Before Rune could react, Lyra flicked her wrist. A bolt of black energy, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, shot across the room. It wasn't aimed at Rune, it was aimed at Cub. The pup yelped in pain as the magic struck him, flying across the room and hitting the wall with a sickening thud. He lay still, a thin trickle of blood coming from his mouth. Something inside Rune broke. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a choice. It was a primal, tectonic shift deep within her soul. The grief, the loneliness, the rage she had suppressed for a lifetime. It all coalesced into a single white-hot point of fury. The world seemed to slow down, the colors leaching away until everything was stark black and white. No, she whispered. The word was not a plea. It was a verdict. Lyra laughed, raising her hand to conjure another larger bolt of energy. Such a touching sentiment. Now it's your turn. As the bolt of darkness flew toward her, Rune didn't flinch. She didn't try to dodge. She simply raised her hand. Her mind was utterly calm, utterly silent. For the first time, she wasn't just passively nullifying magic. She was commanding it. She reached out with her will, with the core of her being, and touched the curse magic hurtling toward her, and unmade it. The bolt of black energy didn't shatter or deflect. It simply ceased to exist. It dissolved into nothingness a foot from her outstretched palm, leaving behind only a faint shimmer in the air. Lyra's jaw dropped. The look of smug superiority on her face was replaced by one of stunned disbelief. How? Rune didn't answer. She took a step forward, and then another. With each step, the latent power within her, the power she had never known she possessed, surged to the surface. It wasn't fire or light. It was a profound, absolute stillness. A silence that consumed all other sound. The very magic Lyra wielded seemed to curdle in her presence, the shadows in the room receding. You are an echo, Rune said, her voice resonating with a quiet power that made the very timbers of the cabin vibrate. You are a thing of pain and spite, and your song is over. She kept walking toward the terrified sorceress. She felt no hatred, no anger anymore, only a vast, pitying emptiness. Lyra was a hollow thing, defined only by the pain she had caused. Lyra screamed, a sound of pure terror, and threw her hands forward, unleashing every ounce of dark power she possessed. A tidal wave of black, chilling energy surged toward Rune. Rune did not stop it this time. She let it wash over her, and she drank it down. The magic, the curse, the hatred. It flowed into her, and was annihilated, leaving nothing behind. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for Lyra. Her connection to her own power was severed, the feedback loop shattering her. The sorceress shrieked as the power she had stolen and twisted over the years was ripped away. She crumpled to the floor, her beautiful face aging in seconds, withering into a withered husk. She was left with nothing but her own empty, bitter soul. The cabin was silent. Rune stood over the fallen woman, her hand still outstretched. Then she rushed to Cub's side. He was breathing. Barely. She gathered him into her arms, tears streaming down her face. His small body was cold. She pressed her hands to his chest, not with the power that had just unmade a sorceress, but with the gentle, desperate plea of a healer. "Live," she whispered. "Please, just live." A faint warmth bloomed beneath her palms. A spark of life magic, the opposite of her nullifying gift. A part of her she never knew existed answered her call. Cub's breathing steadied. His eyes fluttered open. He managed a weak lick on her chin. Rune hugged him close, sobbing with relief. And in that moment, she knew. She could not stay here. Her fight was not over. Lyra had come for her, which meant Idris was still in danger. The curse was tied to Lyra's life force. With her diminished, the curse on him might be broken. But her followers, her allies, would still be a threat. She had to go to him. Not as a healer, not as a remedy, but as an equal. A queen with a power no one in his kingdom had ever seen. She packed a small bag, settled the whimpering but recovering cub into a sling against her chest, and took one last look at the cabin that had been her sanctuary and her prison. She pulled on her boots, the familiar leather a comfort. Then she stepped out the door and, for the first time in her life, walked west, toward the world of men and wolves, toward the king who carried her heart. The journey to Silverwood was arduous, but a new strength flowed through Rune's veins. The power she had unlocked had settled within her, a quiet, humming certainty. The wilderness, once a thing to be feared and respected, now seemed to bend to her will. Animals did not flee from her path. The wind seemed to be at her back. When she finally saw the gleaming white towers of the capital city, Silverwood, rising from the plains, her heart hammered in her chest. It was a place of impossible scale and beauty, so different from her small, wild world. Guards at the gate, clad in silver and gray wolf pelts, moved to block her path, their spears lowered. "The gates are closed to travelers," one said, his eyes dismissing her as a common vagrant. "My name is Rune," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Your king is expecting me." The guards laughed, but their laughter died when a massive figure appeared on the battlements above them. It was Idris. He was clad in black armor, his face grim, but his golden eyes widened in disbelief when he saw her. "Let her pass," he commanded, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "She is my guest." The guards stumbled back, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. Rune walked through the gates, her head held high, cub peeking out of the sling at the new strange world around them. She met Idris in the center of the vast courtyard. The entire castle seemed to be holding its breath, watching. He came to a stop before her, his eyes searching her face. He looked different here, more powerful, more burdened. "The king." "You came," he breathed, the word filled with a universe of relief and disbelief. "Lyra found me," she said simply. "She tried to kill me. She hurt Cub." A murderous rage blazed in his eyes. "Is she—" "She is no longer a threat," Rune said, cutting him off. "Her power is broken. And the curse, I can feel it. It's gone from you. Truly gone." Idris closed his eyes for a moment, a shudder running through him. The shadow that had haunted his bloodline for generations was gone. He looked at her, his expression raw and vulnerable. "You did that. You saved me. Again." "We saved each other," she corrected him softly. "You showed me that a cage is not always made of bars. Sometimes it's just a life you're afraid to leave." He reached out, his hands cupping her face. In front of his guards, his court, his entire world, he leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of homecoming. It was a promise, a prayer, a declaration. It was the closing of a circle that had begun with a dying wolf in the snow. "I love you, Rune," he murmured against her lips, the words he had been too proud and too afraid to say ringing with absolute truth. "Stay with me. Not as a healer, not as a guest, as my queen." "Yes," she whispered, her heart finally truly at peace. Yes. Months later, Rune stood on a balcony overlooking the city. She was dressed in gowns of silver and blue, the colors of the royal house, but she still wore her sturdy leather boots beneath them. She was the Queen of the North, a woman of whispers and legends made real. The pack, once her enemies, now looked at her with a mixture of fear and reverence. She was the witch who had saved their king, the quiet woman whose very presence could undo magic. Idris came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence a warm, solid comfort. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was just remembering a very stubborn wolf pup," she said, a smile playing on her lips. As if on cue, a much larger, but no less mischievous black wolf trotted onto the balcony. He was carrying one of her slippers in his mouth. Idris chuckled, the sound a deep, happy rumble in his chest. "Some things never change." "No," Rune agreed, leaning back against him. "They don't." Cub dropped the slipper at her feet and nudged her hand, his tail wagging. She no longer needed him to hide her boots. She was home. The cold was finally gone.